getting into my part of the demonstration. So, impact of having the wrong model. The guy called Ptolemy, around about the time of Jesus, a little bit before then, came up with the geocentric model of the solar system. And that was built up over a long period of time. And as you can see, Earth was in the centre. There was a fixed substrate around the outside. And then the heavenly bodies, such as the sun, would circle around the Earth nice and circularly. But have a look at Venus and Mercury, if you can see tiny little Mercury. They're doing all these beautiful little loop-de-loops. And that's what it was like for 1600 years. If you went into any person of learning and a little bit later the universities, this is the model they would tell you is the model of the universe with the Earth in the centre. And not much happened for 1600 years. Then a guy called Copernicus came along, very bravely, said, maybe it's not the Earth that's at the centre, it's actually the sun. And gee, that's a simpler model, isn't it? And because we had that simpler model, and yes, the previous one accurately determined where those heavenly bodies were going to be, but this one did too, and it was much more parsimonious. And the great thing about this model was that only about 50 years later, we had Kepler, and Kepler was able to do planetary dynamics based on this much simpler model. In fact, it was really Kepler that cemented the power of the sun-centered model. And then only 70 years after that, we had Newton, who came up with universal theories of gravitation based on Kepler's. So see how quickly having the right model in place allowed enormously fast development of theory and outcomes as well. So it's really important to get the right models in your head, because having the wrong model can hold you up for 1600 years, and not just you, every single person in the world who had any form of learning at that time. And it's not just that. Evolution was one. We thought we had a spontaneous generation of species, and we thought we had separate species. Darwin showed that wasn't true. Plate tectonics, we thought that the continents were actually stuck to the Earth and didn't move. Now we know they do, and that's allowed geology to move quite forward in a lot in the last 50 years. Even more recently, we've had scientists realizing that the dominant concept of probability, statistical significance has become something that's not actually very accurate. And so we're moving more to Bayesian techniques now. Even the concept of the human as an organism, we're a supraorganism. We have microbiomes in it. These are big changes in the way we think about ourselves. And of course, the most important one is, and I'm looking around the room here, and there's a couple of people who probably don't fit this concept, but generally most of us do, we're weirdos. So we're Western, educated, industrial, I've forgotten what the R is, rich and democratic. And that's unfortunately where most of the psychology and sociology has been done over the last 100 years, has been done on weirdos like us. And that hasn't been able to be worked across other cultures. And in fact, through most of history, it's non-weirdos that have been running the show. So it's really important to get the right model. Now, what's this got to do with data governance? Well, unfortunately, up until now, we really haven't had a really good theory of data governance. As a result, we haven't had very many really successful implementations. This is because we're not thinking about it in the way that we need to in order to be able to get the impact that we need. But luckily, and here's some of the ways that we've tried in the past. We thought, well, maybe the reason why our organisation hasn't been able to get data governance going is because we don't have the expertise in-house. So maybe we just need to appoint an expert. So maybe we can get Captain Security to come in and she'll make it all work. Yeah? Or maybe we could just get Privacy Man and suddenly we won't have any privacy troubles in our organisation. Well, I'd like to say that Privacy Man and Captain Security might be a necessary condition for getting a successful data governance going, but they by themselves are not going to achieve it. And in fact, they never have. And too many organisations have tried this. They've got, the board has decided we have a data security issue. Let's get ourselves a CISO. In comes the CISO, problem solved. Hasn't worked. So maybe the problem is technology. Maybe we just give it to IT. They'll put in some data governance or data privacy or data security, or hopefully integrated ones, and then they'll solve it with a collection of IT systems. Well, once again, and I know some of you here, we've tried that. That doesn't work either, not by itself. Once again, probably a necessary part of the whole thing, but not a sufficient by and of itself to get the job done. So, what sort of model could we have? Well, this is a model that's been developed over about 20 years by practitioners who've actually been doing this work for a long period of time. And it has been evolving. There's no denying it. It hasn't stayed still, and there's still a couple of changes that we may even make to it now, such as data ethics is a fairly new piece that maybe needs to go in. It used to be part of the standards and data governance, but probably needs its own area. But essentially what I was hoping to do is to take you through this model and show you why it's a more complete model and more like the Copernican theory than the Ptolemaic one. Okay. Most organisations start with, what's the corporate strategy? If we're going to be ensuring ourselves to be able to be successful in our data governance implementation or our data strategy, what we should be doing is starting with the corporate strategy. No, this doesn't work either. And the main reason is because there's a lot more to an organisation than the corporate strategy. I've seen some examples where there was an annual statement at the end of the year, where the entire report was filled, 99 pages out of 100, with what was going on in the corporate strategy and how successful it was. And then on the very final page, the other 95% of the budget was actually put in the financial statement. So the roads, rates and rubbish, this was a council, was actually not mentioned anywhere in the other 99 pages. It was all about that little 5% of how the organisation's going to change. But guess what? The other 95% of the organisation was using data too, not just the parts that were changing in the corporate strategy. What parts are those? Well, there's obviously the parts that serve your customers, create your products, create your services. Those parts are obviously business as usual. You need to make sure your data is supporting that as well. On top of that, you've got the ones who are supporting them. So you've got your HR, your finance, your auditors. Those are the corporate support part. Data is needed by them as well. And then there's a whole other bunch that are outside your organisation that are asking for data from your organisation. Could be your regulators, could be your parent company, it could be your external auditors. There's a lot of people asking for data and asking for data products and services well beyond your corporate strategy. So it's very important to keep all of these in mind. And what sort of data products and services are we needing to come up with? Well, obviously everyone thinks about reporting, that's pretty obvious. But as you can see, that's only one of the many products and services that data can be used to create to help support the business outcomes. Another one might be the workflows. So within your systems, you've got workflows. The data needs to be accurate, it needs to be timely, it needs to be well-defined, it needs to be well archived and so on in areas of your workflows in order to make sure that your corporate processes are actually working as well. And then there's a whole stack of others. I'm not going to go through all of them, be too boring and I'd use up all the time. But the point is that there's a lot of data products and services beyond reporting that you have to take into account. Now, how do you make these data products and services quality? Well, an important part, we all know, and I've just mentioned them before as the roundtables that we're thinking of creating, are things like data quality, data security, data privacy. We know about those ones. But then there's a whole stack more. We've got data custodianship, so who owns the data, who's responsible for allowing people who have access to data to edit it, to see it, to archive it. Data definitions, do we all know what a customer actually means so that when we're adding customers from various systems, we're actually adding up the same thing? Data product catalog, so do we know where all our data is, let alone whether or not it contains personally identifiable information? These kinds of things are very important. So we need to make sure we're covering all this. Now, DIMBOK covers a subset of these. So this is a superset of DIMBOK. Now, then you start to say, right, well, now we know what all the components of the overall model are. Where does data strategy fit in? Well, it becomes quite simple now. It's how we're going to do better in that ecosystem. How are we going to improve the data considerations in order to improve the data products and services in order to serve our business outcomes better. And you can see with all of the potential ways that we could go wrong in each of these steps, that not including all of these areas gives us a problem and is more likely to lead to us having an incomplete system. Data governance becomes very simple as well. It's basically how we make decisions about data. So what are the roles and responsibilities across this ecosystem? What are the standards? What are the regulations across this ecosystem? So it becomes very simple. If it encompasses any part of the data processing services, any of the data considerations, helping the business outcomes, it goes into our data governance model. So that's the model. Now, the only other thing I wanted to say was to make it clear, and another reason why it's so difficult to do data governance, is that it involves pretty much everyone. And if we just look at on the way that data gets created or comes into your organisation, it obviously gets keyed into your systems, you know that. Obviously, you can do batch data exchange with other systems from partners. You can also download it from the internet or bring it in via USB or media. Every time you're doing these things, you're bringing the data into the purview of your enterprise and becomes your responsibility. On top of that, and as you can see, everyone does some of this stuff. Every single person in your organisation does some of this stuff. And on the way out, you know, people are destroying and deleting the stuff. People are sending it out on their USB sticks. People are sending it out as attachments to their emails, as well as exposing it through APIs and all the standard stuff we think about. So at the end of the day, we need absolutely everybody to be able to consider all of these things. Who is allowed to actually access this data that's just come into our organisation or we're about to send out? Does it have personally identifiable information? Does it have national security implications? That actually does affect some of the people in this room. What are the cultural considerations? Some of the government departments particularly have this particular issue. Can you tell me with your hand on your heart that every single person who does some of the things on the left and the right of this diagram are taking into account all the considerations in the grey area whenever they're dealing with data? And the answer is no. It's hard. This is hard to do. So how do we make sure that everybody in your organisation changes their behaviour and we're able as an organisation to make sure that all these considerations are occurring when all of those actions and more, there's more little dots down the bottom, there's more actions that are being taken by people within your organisation to handle data. Are we sure, how can we be sure as an organisation to make sure all those considerations are being taken in? Well, we've also got a model for that because everyone is involved. And the model is what drives employee action. We have to make sure we're touching every single employee. People, process and technology is often what people automatically say to that. But as we can see, that's only touching around about 4 of the parts of the overall model. So you've got your computer systems, you've got your processes. There's a lot of parts of your organisations that don't run through processes. Just go up and ask your Director General or your CEO what the processes are for that senior executive. I'm pretty sure they'll laugh you out of the office. They're problem solvers, right? And every organisation has problem solvers in it that don't follow a process. They're having to discover things and work out how to do it. So processes don't cut it. Computer systems, once again, necessary, not sufficient. Hierarchy, how you make sure that the various people are told what they need to do. That's important as well. So that's the people, process, technology piece. But just a quick thought about it, and you realise there's parts of PPT that don't include it, such as executive pronouncements. What your CEO says in the media has an effect on people. What you put out in your newsletters, on your emails and in your SharePoint and so on, that has an impact. What you KPI and bonus people, that has an impact as well. All of these things are very important, and the model's got plenty more. Once again, I won't go through the whole lot, it gets boring. But the point is that it's a lot more than PPT. And you need to align all of these levers in order to be able to get change to happen across your entire organisation. That's why we're having trouble with data governance. So before I hand over to Jacco, I just want to quickly summarise. You need to make sure you've got the right model in your head. And you need to make sure that change is a lot more than simply people, process and technology. All right. So if you've got any questions, can we bring them up at the Q&A session that's happening in about 20 or so minutes? Okay, I'll now call up Jaco from Informatica to go